No Box Dance presents Dance Behind the Screen, process production, and social media. Don't forget, say no to the box. Dile no a la caja. 고정관념이란 상자에서 벗어나세요.
Grants. I am so excited to talk with you today, Greg, all about fundraising and grant writing and grant reviewing.
Yes.
So welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
To start us off, can you just give our audience a little bit of context about who you are and what you do in this grant world?
Yes. Well, my name is Greg Ortel. I'm a senior community philanthropy officer at Communities Foundation of Texas.
Which is where we are right now.
Which is, where we're at. We're here in one of our conference rooms recording this chat. We're based in Dallas, and we serve the nonprofit sector here in the North Texas region. So we work with donors, we work with philanthropy-minded businesses, and we work with the nonprofit community to ultimately create thriving community.
Well, I'm excited for our conversation today. I'm hoping we can really dig deep into all things grants. This is a world that I would say the role I'm primarily wear the hat of is writing grants for No Box Dance, writing grants for my other organization, Mixed Emotus. I have served on one grant review panel, which is how we met at TACA, which was a really eye-opening experience for me to understand the behind the scenes of the grant review process. So I'm hoping we could kind of start right at the beginning. So when you put out a call for a grant, what do you think it's important for organizations or individuals to look for in that call? And I ask that because in some of my other conversations with grant writing, sometimes you apply for a grant and it's not even a match for your organization. Mm-hmm. So could you kind of talk about some key things that we should be looking for?
Yes, that's a great question. The very first thing you should probably look at is what is the call specifically asking for? What is this funder looking to fund through this grant process? Typically, a funder will provide what's called a grant guidelines or something of the like that is your roadmap, the grant. It's what is it that we're looking to fund? What types of institutions? What does eligibility look like? What is the evaluative criteria? All of those things are typically laid out before you even start the application itself. So it's really important that you review that and make sure there's strong alignment, because I think that's one of the common pitfalls is, this organization is doing a grant. I know that they fund arts organizations. I'm just going to go in and apply without reading the specifics about what they're looking for. Because, they might be looking to fund youth programs. And if your organization isn't doing youth programs,
it's not a match.
It's not a match. And so it'll be not only a waste of the funder's time, but also your time. Like, you're going to go through all of these hoops of completing an application when, probably didn't need to do it in the first place.
That makes total sense. And so then let's say that's like our first step. But let's go back one more step. I feel like what can even be more confusing is the process of finding the right granting organizations at the beginning. Do you have recommendations for organizations where people could look for grant opportunities and grant listings?
Yeah, so, it really depends where you are geographically. Funders tend to have geographic priorities in which they're giving to nonprofits. So what I recommend looking at is, who's in your backyard? Usually there's city funding that's available for the arts. If the city is not doing the funding itself, sometimes they have a arts partner that does it for them.
Well, that's interesting.
So you'll see that in communities like Houston, for example.
Mm-hmm. I know the dance organization, Dance Source Houston, is an organization. So if you're in Houston, you can look for a grant through that partner organization.
Yeah. Houston Arts Alliance, helps the city fund arts institutions with taxpayer dollars.
Which is different than Dallas because we have the Office of Arts and Culture.
Correct. We have the Office of Arts and Culture, which is our city funding. We also have state funding through the Texas Commission on the Arts. In Dallas, we're also very lucky to have an organization like TACA, the Arts Community Alliance, where I worked at previously to where I am now, that is a private funder. So they work with donors to raise money that they distribute out through grants.
Now I want to talk about the application.
Yes.
Because I think this is the part that really does separate one applicant from the other, right?
Absolutely.
The writing, the budget, everything like that. So let's start with the first thing is usually sharing like your mission and the values of the organization and a little bit of the history. What do you look for as a grant reviewer when looking at the history of an organization?
Yeah, so what I'm looking for typically when I'm reading a grant application is what that history looks like. You know, it's nice to know how many years you've been in existence, but I also want to know a little bit more than that. What have you been doing since your beginnings? How has your organization grown? What other types of programs have you developed over time? That just gives us more context as to what situation you're in right now, coming in with the application and knowing what you do now.
Are there things that you think set certain organizations apart, especially newer organizations, when you're looking at that history that makes you more willing to maybe put them to the next phase or something like that?
Yeah, it's hard when you're new because you don't have a history.
Right.
But, you know, as we see with a lot of arts organizations, the founders of the organization have been practicing that art for a long time before they started an organization. You could even talk about that. You could talk about the personal background. You know, what have you been doing before you started this company, for example? Another great thing for new organizations is to understand the unique value that your organization brings to the community that isn't being met by anybody else.
The No Box Dance Film Festival, NBFF, is now accepting submissions for its 5th year as an independent film festival. NBFF seeks dance-related films that challenge the possibilities of what dance can look like in video form. NBFF has 4 categories for submissions: short series, general, documentaries, and kids. For more information on how to apply, visit filmfreeway.com/KNOW Dance Film Festival.
So then after we have our history, what do you think is like most important to look at next as a reviewer? Where do you go next?
Yeah, I want, you know, we have the history and we have your mission statement. What I'm really looking for is the language clear and concise? Does this organization know who they are, what they're doing, how they're doing it, and I think maybe the most important is why they're doing it?
Do you have an example of maybe, you can not say the name of the organization, but like in a grant application, maybe somebody who really expressed the why of the organization really clearly and like what that looked like and how they did it?
Yeah. This one's always tough because usually the why is very personal to the person who is creating the nonprofit. Sometimes it's too personal and it's not necessarily built for community.
Right.
So I think you have to be honest with yourself. Like, first of all, are we doing this to stroke my own personal artistic ego?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I actually trying to build community around something that's bigger than just me?
Mm-hmm.
An example, I know of a dance organization, and their why is all about queer expression. And they don't feel that there is representation and reflection of the queer experience in dance, in movement. And so they are creating an outlet or a medium through which they can uplift those voices, those perspectives, and put them on display through dance and movement.
That's helpful to hear, like, I guess as a reviewer, what you're really looking for is that why. And sometimes as a writer for grants, it can feel like I get lost in just like trying to answer all the questions.
Yeah,
sometimes.
I think we focus a lot on the what.
Yeah, exactly. And the how.
Yes.
Because typically it's like, how are you going to spend the money? And you want to articulate, you have a clear plan of where it's going to go. But I think that I interviewed Lily Weiss, and we also talked briefly about grant reviewing. And it made me think, she talked about like the importance of being authentic to yourself and staying true to the story of you or your organization and being clear with that voice and not just trying to appease the granting organization by just like using their language back at them, which is something that it's kind of, we talked about how it's like a struggle because you want to show that you read that roadmap and the guidelines, but at the same time, you want to infuse your story and your voice throughout. And it seems like kind of saying the why is one way that we could really like fuse the two together.
Yeah. And I think the why is one of those things that separates you from other applicants. It is going to be rare that two organizations exist for the same why. In some cases, in other sectors like education or health, I think you might see that more often. But in the arts, I think there's a lot of variability for that. So I agree. That is great. It's the interweaving of personal story and narrative with making sure that we're responding to all of the questions in the application in a clear and concise way.
Next, I want to talk about the budget, which for a newer organization, that's always I guess it's not so challenging because there's not necessarily a lot there, but it can be, it can make me feel like nervous for us to like share this information because it's like, we're asking for this money, but we're still just getting started.
Right.
So we're not where these established organizations are in terms of finances, but we are making sure that we're spending our finances in a clear way.
Yes.
So when you're looking at a budget for a newer organization, what are you looking for specifically?
Yeah, when I'm looking at a budget, I just want a clear understanding of, how is the money going out and how do you plan to get the money to come in? So what I like to look at is diversified revenue, meaning, what are the different ways that your organization is bringing in funds? So are you budgeting for ticket sales? What does that look like? Fundraising, contributed revenue. What does that look like? Are you budgeting for individual giving versus city grants versus private grants? I want it to be clear to me that the organization is giving thought about where their resources are coming from and going. And you might not, a budget is a helpful tool to understand that budgets change. A lot of times I hear that, I don't know how much something costs, so how do I budget for it? I think it's like, how are you going about trying to figure out how much something costs? Like, have you gone around and asked somebody?
Getting quotes.
All of those, and using that to kind of build like a draft kind of plan year by year.
Okay, and then typically they ask, there's like a section in the grants where you can kind of explain your budget.
Yes.
What are you looking for in that?
Yeah, I think that's a very unused section in a lot of applications. I think people attach their budget, see that budget narrative, and just like, oh, I'm good, I attached the budget. I think some questions that funders often have is, if your organization has a budget line item that says other, and it's sizable, like if it's more than 20% of your budget and it's just this other or miscellaneous category.
What is that?
What is it? Like, just give us an idea. And I mean, it could be a bunch of things just kind of thrown into there, but just give us a rough idea as to, what that includes,
So for one of our grants, we have like an in-kind donations line item. And then typically I'll use like underneath for that explanation, I'll break down where those in-kind donations are coming from and how much they cost. Do you think that's a good thing?
Yes, that's great. I once read a budget and it was 50% of their budget was in-kind donations and zero information as to what that was. And the organization, it was a $300,000 budget organization and half was in kind. And I had no idea what was included in that in kind budget. Once we went back and asked, it became very clear. But that's an example of something that you can include. Some organizations budget for a deficit. Explaining why that is.
Oh, interesting.
What's going on there?
Are there red flags that stand out to you when you're reviewing a budget that make you like maybe rank them lower in that portion, or you have questions that you need to talk to them about? Maybe you could give us like 3 or 5 red flags.
Yeah. So, and I hesitate to call them red flags, because it really depends on the context of the organization. I think some common things that get pointed out is your program expenses as a percentage of your whole budget. So if you, for your program-related costs, if it's fairly low compared to everything else you're doing, that might flag the attention of the reviewer. Because what that tells, without any context, is we're not spending a lot of the money that we're bringing in directly on the programs we're doing in the community. However, that might not be true because salaries are in another line item. And let's say that you are doing a lot of education, and really the cost that you have is the teachers that you're investing in. If that's not in your program related budget, which it probably should be, but sometimes, salary is broken out, then it's not such a worry to have the program expenses.
Because then the budget the percentage would be more.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
What are some other red flags that you might?
Another is if an organization is essentially getting all of their revenue from 1 or 2 sources. That's worrisome. I think I mentioned the diversified revenue. We want to make sure that, you're not so dependent on one source of funding, because think about if that source of funding no longer became available, like even if it was a person, and let's say that they weren't around next year, or they changed their focus of where they want to give, that's going to have a large impact on your organization and the work you're doing. So you're going to have to find other resources to fill that gap.
We've talked a little bit about like the written application, and then we've talked about the budget. What do you think are some other important things that we should talk about when it comes to preparing our grant to submit?
I mentioned the who, what, where, when, and whys. So that's something that you should always have prepared in your back pocket, not just for grants, for any type of fundraising request. I think having your budget prepared, like you said, is right on point. I think it's making sure if you're applying for something specific, like a project production,
like our film festival or something like that.
Correct. Is having as much detail about that project as you can for purposes of the application. Sometimes timing is really hard, where the grant cycle doesn't align with how far you might be in planning for your project. So trying to get as much of that detail as possible before you submit is important. I think another thing you can do to even help yourself prepare is having another conversation with the funder. We talked about meeting before you even apply, but you can also meet with them during an application process. If there are any questions you have, or if you want to make sure that what you're planning to apply to is in alignment, you can ask those questions. Again, every funder is different.
Right.
Some will be more receptive to assisting you through the process than others, but I think you should try.
That's great advice. And I know one thing too is like attending if there's like orientations or like Q&A sessions for the applicants. For some of the grants we've applied maybe 3 or 4 times, but I always try to go every single time because I know with each year or each cycle, things can change and some of the details can get missed as well.
Exactly. That's great advice. I love a funder who provides an orientation or a webinar on the grant that they're doing. I think it just gives a more formal opportunity to ask some of those questions. I also listen to the questions other people are asking because sometimes, I'm not maybe the most experienced in the room with writing grants, but that grant writer over there on the call, that they're really busy. So I'm going to listen to maybe what they're asking and see if I can gain some insight as well.
That's a great point. And oftentimes on those like webinars, they stop the recording when it's time for the Q&A parts at the end. So I'm always really grateful to be there to listen in to what other people are asking.
Yes.
So you should attend live if you can.
Yes. If it's live, try and do it. And it's a great networking opportunity for the funder to see you in the room and just continually cultivating that relationship. Also to see maybe some other peers in the room and connect with them on what they're doing. I don't think we should all be working in silos. So it's really helpful to see who else is applying for the grant. And, who knows, you might become friends with another organization or people there, and you can ask them questions. Like if you are having issues with a grant or challenges and you're not quite sure, you can always go to your peers as resources too.
That's great advice. That's something that we talk a lot about at No Box Dance is how can we like lift one another up and make it less competitive? Because I think naturally in like the dance world, sometimes it can be very competitive, like if there's only one role or something like that. But I feel like with money, there's enough to go around. It's just finding the right avenues for what you're trying to do, for your why.
Exactly.
And maybe for us, it wouldn't be the right why. So we're always trying to like reach out to our friends or other organizations like, hey, this doesn't fit for us, but maybe it would fit for you. So you should check it out.
Yes, I love that. I completely agree.
One thing we haven't talked about yet is like submitting other assets to the grant. Sometimes they want other materials like photos or videos or just kind of other proof of concepts.
Right.
What do you look for when you're looking at those materials? And do you think a compilation, am I saying that right? Yeah, a compilation document is like the best way to go with that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, what is the organization requesting? And start there. Sometimes they'll have specifications like no longer than 30-second video, or we only want still images of this particular type of programming. So just make sure that you first look at those guidelines before you start, just attaching all the sizzler reels you have.
Go back to the roadmap.
Yes, go back to the roadmap, check the guidelines. But, I think when it comes to these additional attachments or other components of the application, it's really smart to put yourself in the shoes of the reviewer and think about, if I was looking at my grant application, what would I want to see? What would really be reflective of the work that I do? Let's say you're trying a new program or a new project and you don't have any visual representation of what that looks like because
That's what
it's
I was
brand
going to
new.
ask. Yeah. What if you're conceptualizing something that doesn't exist?
I would try to match it to something you've previously done as close to what this new thing you're doing as possible. That's really helpful because sometimes as a reviewer, it's hard to come up with visually what the request is through words on paper. So having some sort of like visual
Especially
idea.
in the arts.
Yeah. Even if it's, I heard of one choreographer who put together like a vision board on Pinterest and like screenshotted the Pinterest board and attached it
That's
to
a
a grant
great idea.
application.
So you can have a sense of the world they're trying to create.
Yeah. So kind of like a storyboard or something like that. If you have excerpts from a new work that you're creating, throw in some of those excerpts. I'll say a word of caution is, making sure you tell the reviewer what it is that you're putting in there, because
like this is a rehearsal video.
Rehearsal, just to give an example, because things might change. You don't want them to be so latched on to whatever they saw in the video. So those are some of the things that I look at. What it really comes down to is highlighting and amplifying everything that you've already put in words on the paper, but through that additional visual or audio stimuli.
That's great.
And don't go overboard.
Yes,
don't
put
overboard.
too many.
Don't put too many. And also, if you put that 30-minute video, a reviewer is not going to watch all 30 minutes. So if you need to put some cues in there, like start the video at the 2.5-minute mark, please do that.
What are attributes that you think make a really strong application? We've already talked about the who, what, how, why. But are there any other attributes?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things. Obviously, the who, what, where, when, whys, being clear, concise.
You've said that several times. Clear and concise.
Clear and concise. Just because it says you can include 1,000 words doesn't always mean that you need to use 1,000 words to get your message across.
That's a good, I needed to hear that. Sometimes I take those word counts as like trying to get it exactly at 1,000 or exactly at like the 300 mark. It's like, okay, no, it's okay to be under.
It's okay to be under. Again, that's putting yourself in the shoe of the reviewer. If they're reading, I did a grant process recently and we had 317 applications.
Oh my.
I'm grateful for some organizations who didn't use up all of the space to write their program, especially if they were just repeating some of the same things over and over again. Other things that I think elevate an application, and I took some notes that I'm going to refer to, is if you have any programs that are informed by data. Are you collecting demographic information about your audiences, about your class participants? If you are teaching classes as part of your programming, how do you measure success? How do you know that you did a good job? That's really good information to share with a funder who might not be so familiar with the impact that your organization is making.
I love that piece of advice because I think sometimes when you're in the application, you're saying so much about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it and like what your goals are for it. But one thing we always try to do at the end is make sure we say, like, we know we've met this goal if we do blah, blah, and blah.
Yes, that is great. That is such a missing piece in a lot of applications. It's, okay, we have these goals, but then, like, how are we going to measure those goals? Do we need to implement a survey with our audience? Do we need to maybe do some interviews with people? Can we connect with the school district and can we get are their grades, are students' grades improving? Like, those are all like different things that you can be looking at, but it's taking a look at your programming and, again, what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it.
And how you can synthesize then that data to make it clear in your grant application.
Yes. And I think that's a challenge for arts organizations generally. Most of the work that we do is, and I say we like I'm still working at an arts organization. I'm not anymore, but I am an artist.
Yes.
It's we present on a stage and we have an audience, and then the audience leaves, and then we think because we finished a piece without falling, or a performance and not missing a note, that we did a really great job. But really the reason we do the work is for the community. So how are we getting that feedback, and how are we seeing the impact of our work on the community
and measuring the impact?
Yes. Yeah.
What do you think are some of the top common mistakes grant applicants make?
No Box Dance is now on Patreon. Gain access to our community resources, early access to Dance Behind the Screen podcast episodes like this one, membership in our creative book club, personalized dance film feedback, and more. Visit patreon.com/KNOWBOXDance to select the membership level that is right for you.
And this is going to be a no-brainer, is not clicking submit on that application button.
What?
And you would be surprised as to how often that happens, where you go through all of the work of completing the entire application and forgot to click submit. Or if you click submit and there was a confirmation button after that saying, "Are you sure?" Not clicking yes.
I'm trying to not have my mouth gaping open, but I'm shocked by that.
Yeah, make sure you get that confirmation. And if you don't, call the funder.
I always send a follow-up email just to make sure, because I know with the internet, you never know when it could go out. And it's always you write a whole thing and then somehow your computer shuts down and lost it all. I'm deathly afraid of that. So I always send a follow-up emailing. "Hi, did you receive our application?"
Yes, that's great. And you just reminded me of another pitfall, which is do not wait until the very last minute to start working on that application.
I have a tip for that. I always look at the application due dates, and then I change it in my calendar a week before or something like that, because things happen and I can be a procrastinator. I'm sure there's many like me out there. And so I always change that date in my calendar so I know, okay, now it has to be done the week before. And then that gives me that buffer week to really review everything, submit before the deadline. Make sure I click the submit button.
Yes, that is great advice. But also, let's be realistic. Sometimes you don't know about a grant opportunity until the day that the application is due.
That's true.
So it's just trying to not let that happen too frequently. Let's not bring our heart rate up too high when we can control it. A tip that I usually have too is generally funders do work on annual cycles. So keeping a grant calendar so that you're aware of all of the deadlines that are happening with different funding organizations, that can be really, really helpful.
Do you think social media is influencing the dance world? And if so, how does it influence your work?
I mean, right away, I would say absolutely. I think social media is transforming everybody's work and how we operate. It's changing, how we see ourselves or how we portray ourselves. I think there are pros and cons to all of it. I see social media. One of the good things is as a access tool. So for dance, you couldn't see dance happening unless you were, there in person to see it. Yeah. And I think social media has allowed a window into that world where you can see performances.
From your bed.
Yeah, from your bed. Yeah. Also, you can see things that happen even behind the traditional stage, like the creation of a work, the rehearsals. I think that's so cool. I think also because social media can be viewed from, your bed, your work can now take place in anywhere. It could be even we're talking about virtual reality now too. Like it can literally, your work can take place in a virtual space, which is really, really cool. I think for me and my personal work, I think social media has helped me see the impact that organizations, nonprofits have on the community a bit more. Again, I'm so used to reading words on a piece of paper or, hopefully not on a piece of paper. Hopefully it's an online application.
On a computer.
Yeah. Hopefully it's on the computer. But it's nice to be able to connect more personally with nonprofits and with people who truly are working in community and can, reflect that through a social media identity.
That makes me wonder, do you as like a grant reviewer look up people's social media?
I don't. Maybe I...
Like if you submit an application,
I... Probably not. Or if I did, I definitely would not judge an organization based on what their social media...
How many followers
Yes,
they
how
have.
many followers. There are funders out there who do that. I want to see organizations who are doing the work. It's great if they have a employee that they can hire to do the social media, but so many organizations don't.
I know.
It's hard.
I just asked that because with No Box Dance, so much of the space we operate in is the digital space. Like we have our show podcast here, and we share a lot of like videos and things on our Instagram. And so I was just wondering if that's like, oh, they have a really cool Instagram. So like we trust that they're engaging the digital community. It just made me wonder about that.
Yeah, I think it could be a plus. But I wouldn't, if it was not, I wouldn't discount. Same thing for a website. Like, I think it's important that there's information available to the public about what you do. But, some websites have all the bells and whistles and some are just, plain direct to the point.
Mission statement, right, programs. Right, and I think you bring up a good point about that because it is like a whole nother full-time job, just managing your social media and your web presence. And some organizations might not have the bandwidth to do all their amazing, important community programming as well as balance the digital presence as well.
Agreed.
How do you say no to the box?
I try to think of a box not existing in the first place. So really trying, if I'm creating a new grant program, I try not to look in the past and start with, well, what has been done before? Let's throw that out the window. Let's say goodbye to history and maybe try conceptualizing from the start. There are benefits to not recreating the wheel all the time, but I think sometimes we get so much into a groove of just the status quo. So it's trying to avoid that.
Okay, we have our last segment, which is our Flash 4, where we ask all our guests to answer 4 questions in a flash.
I'm so nervous.
Are you ready?
I think so. We're running out of time.
Okay, let's do it.
Ready.
We got 1 minute. We got this. If you had to recommend a resource to our audience, what would it be?
Ooh, there are so many great books that I would recommend. But after our conversation today, I'd probably recommend a book called Start With Why.
What was the first dance you saw?
Ooh, this is tough. I was raised as a musician and didn't experience dance until later in life. But I have a very vivid memory of watching dance online.
What?
It was a recording of The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky, and it was a Tina Bausch choreographed Rite of Spring. And I remember watching that on YouTube. I think that might have been the first real dance that I saw, or at least had this profound appreciation and awe in seeing.
Do you think social media has a positive influence on the dance world, yes or no?
Yes, I think it does.
What is your favorite social media platform?
I am a sucker for Instagram.
Well, thank you, Greg. Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners today that you feel like we didn't get to touch on?
I just want to say good luck, navigating the nonprofit world, and fundraising and grants is super challenging. So I recommend trying to be as efficient as you can, try to use your resources as effectively as you can, and just keep doing great work. I'll leave with those words.
How can our listeners stay connected with you?
Yeah, feel free to follow me on my social media handles. I think you might link them at Greg Ortel. And feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions, regardless of whether you're in Dallas or, Timbuktu. Shoot me an email. Happy to connect.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you.
Dance Behind the Screen podcast is produced by No Box Dance, an art service organization that creates, collaborates, and discusses art with artists and the public. Dance Behind the Screen podcast is co-hosted by Azaria Hogans, Raina Mondragon, Martheya Nygaard, and Yejin Choi, with sound design by Daniel Rosas.
Thanks for taking your time to tune in to Dance Behind the Screen, a bi-monthly interview series where we go behind the screen to question process, product, and social media. Be sure to follow us on social media at KNOW Box Dance. See you next time, and don't forget to say no to the box.